Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is an analysis of the Reeve's Tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, translated by Theodore Morrison. And we're gonna try to understand and really appreciate what this guy was talking about. Simpkin the miller, his skull had no more hair than a bald ape, a thief of cornmeal, and sly at that, well versed in how to steal. He cheated the great college, worst of all, that stands in Cambridge, King and Solihull, for he was given their malt and wheat to grind. A bad character, right? It's a thief. And then there's Simpkin's wife, brought up in a convent, proud as a jay. She was pert. And their daughter Molly, 20 or so, she was plump, well-rounded wench. Her nose was flat, her blue eyes clear as glass, her buttocks broad, her breasts were round and high, and she had lovely hair, and that's no lie. Remember, this is Theodore Morrison's translation of the medieval English of Chaucer. And then there was the students, Ellen and John, quote, loved their fun, and they were full of cheek. What is cheek? Well, it means something that's impotent or disrespectful in a playful and amusing way, right? So they were brought together when the students, quote, begged the provost at the university they were attending, Cambridge, to let them go and see their corn ground at the mill, end quote. And when the steward was, quote, sick and in a stupor lying, the miller stole both meal and corn more than he ever had since he was born, 100-fold that he stole from the university. Outrageous. And despite the provost raising a great affair, the miller showed little care. The two students, for a jaunt, bet each other that the miller, quote, wouldn't cost them half a peck. In other words, they're going to go to this miller and they're betting between each other that he won't be able to steal anything. So you know the rest of the story if you read it with Jimmy, and hopefully you did. You're not just jumping to this analysis. The students determined to get their revenge for Simpkin's antics with their horse. In other words, he let the horse go and they had to chase him down, right? They had to chase him down. And being a crook by stealing, spend the night in the miller's house. And in a moment of deception, they sleep with the miller's wife and the daughter. In the slapstick ending, a fight ensues, and in the morning where the miller is badly beaten. Remember? They just beat the heck out of him. So the students leave, pick up the bread that their grain was used to bake bread with, and then the story is over. Now, what's this story really about, right? Besides the slapstick comedy? Well, revenge is a dish best served cold. Do you know who said that? You're going to find out in a minute. It was not Confucius. Confucius is often associated with the saying, before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. What does that mean? It means your own and the person you're trying to avenge yourself on. That's the real Confucius. The subhead on this section was from Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. Hopefully you saw the movie. If you didn't, Jimmy recommends it. It's a great movie, The Wrath of Khan. Ricardo Montalban. Highlight that. Okay. So beneath the slapstick comedy of this tale is a story of revenge. Outside and inside the tale. Remember, this is complex narration. We have an anonymous narrator telling us what the pilgrims said on these tales. So the Reeves may be telling the tale, but it's someone else among the pilgrims, the anonymous narrator, that's telling us what the Reeves is saying. You understand? Outside, because the Reeve told it about the miller who started the conflict by telling a story about a carpenter. If you remember the miller's tale, the Reeve's tale comes right after this, right after the miller's tale. Go back and read the miller's tale if you forgot. But in the miller's tale, the buffoon was a carpenter. So the Reeve took offense because he's a carpenter. So he's going to get revenge. That's one of the revenge motifs on the miller for telling a story about a carpenter who he is. So the Reeve says, quote, with leave, I'll pay him back before I'm done. I'll speak his low talk, just as he has spoken. His low talk meaning body, right? Very common language. And I pray to God he gets his neck well broken. Holy mackerel. Talk about revenge. I'm going to break your neck. One of my friends used to say that to his kid when we were in camping. Put that down, Tommy. I'll break your arm. And I would tell him, why are you saying that? You're never going to break the kid's arm. What are you talking about? Well, this Reeve says, I hope the miller gets his neck broken. Anyway, the story explores the theme of revenge and the idea of an eye for an eye, with the students extracting their own revenge on the miller for his dishonesty. So what is the only thing really going on here? I mean, really, what is the only thing? It's hard to say. But remember that the Reeve is telling this tale to other pilgrims on the journey, and the anonymous narrator is telling us what the Reeve and others say. It's complicated narration, but we have to get it straight if we're going to understand and appreciate it beyond slapstick comedy. Wisdom. Well, Jimmy, what do you mean wisdom? There's no wisdom in this slapstick comedy. There's wisdom everywhere if you just look close enough, right? So wisdom. For example, the Reeve's tale is actually sprinkled with wisdoms throughout the narrative. Here's some examples. Quote. This is from the prologue, the Reeve's prologue. For at my very birth, beyond a doubt, death drew the tap of life and let it out. And ever since that tap has run away, till almost empty is the keg today. What does that mean? It means he's getting old, right? What a beautiful way to express aging, isn't it? The tap of life. Oh, that's one of the things I want you to do when you read with Jimmy is appreciate and understand the language, including the language of the translator, Theodore Morrison, of these classic pieces of literature. Because we're reading to learn how other people lead their lives and how to lead our own, right? But we're also reading so that we understand what the meaning of life. Okay? Another piece from the prologue. Quote, if I should take him down from his high throne, it's always proper to answer force with force. Who's he talking about? Well, the miller is going to knock him off his high throne. It's always proper to answer force with force. Do you believe that? The Reeve certainly does. That's why he's going to tell a story about a miller. But is it always proper to answer force with force? That's Jimmy's theory of the rubber band. Who's in control? I think I may have shared that with you. If you take one end of the rubber band and I take the other and we start pulling, it's going to snap if we keep pulling, right? Eventually, the rubber band will snap. But if you start pulling and I let you pull me, the question I'm going to ask you is who's in control? Well, I'm in control, Jimmy, because I'm pulling you. Well, you think you're pulling me, but I'm actually letting you pull me. Do you see how complicated this can get? So is it always proper to answer force? Should you always pull the rubber band back? I don't think so. Wisdom's from the tale. Well, these jealous men are dangerous, as we know. At least they want their wives to think them so. So the miller is a jealous guy. Do you know jealous people? Jealousy is a powerful emotion. I don't know if you've ever felt it. I've seen it. My dad was a jealous man. I've seen it in action. And we all get a little jealous, but you study jealousy and you start to understand jealousy, you really start to understand there's nothing to be jealous about. You are who you are, right? You can't change who you are. Well, Jimmy, I can change. Well, maybe you can, but you are who you are. Accepting who you are, jealousy fades away. You nullify it. Quote, a man slaves for himself, or he's a fool. Necessity, say the learned, knows no rule. The better the trap, no matter how sly they make it, the more I'll pilfer when I'm ready to take it. You know who's talking there, right? So a man slaves for himself or he's a fool. What does that mean? Working for others is not good? Well, entrepreneurs understand this. Jimmy started his company over 30 years ago. I worked for the man a long time. I talked to other entrepreneurs who work for the man, right? There's nothing wrong with working for the man. Some people are born to work for the man, and other people are not. You work for yourself, right? Or do you? Do you work for other people? Do you share? Do you do good deeds? Necessity knows no rule. What does that mean? Well, if necessity doesn't know any rule, if you need to take something, take it, right? No. If you're really, 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 really hungry, what do? Steal? What? What do? Think about these things. Another wisdom. The greatest scholar is not the wisest man, as one time to the wolf remarked the mare. That sounds like an Aesop fable, but it's not. We're going to talk about this one in a minute. The greatest scholar is not the wisest man. Well, that's true. Book learning is not the same as life learning, is it? Is it? I don't think so. They don't teach you life in college. Jim's got 2 degrees, right? BA, MA. But it's nothing like real life. I can tell you that. So if you're going to college, study hard. If you're not in college, work hard. A man can't lure a hawk with empty hand. Isn't that the truth? Not that you want to lure hawks. What does that mean? Does it have implications? A man can't lure a hawk with an empty hand. You're not going to attract anybody with an empty hand. What's the saying? I'm not really any kind of guy if I come calling with a handful of nothing and a mouthful of much obliged. Have you heard that? So don't go anywhere without bringing something, right? If in one point of law a man's aggrieved, then in some other point he shall be relieved. Tit for tat. Is that true? Do you believe that? If at one point, that's what the student's rationalization is in this story, right? They rationalize that they've been aggrieved by the miller, so they're welcome to take the miller's wife and daughter, right? You believe that? His wife got hers, and so did his daughter. This comes from the cheating that false millers do. True are the words of this old proverb still. Quote, let him not look for good whose works are ill, for tricked himself shall every trickster be. You fool others, but you're really fooling yourself. There's a lot of wisdom in that. A lot of wisdom. Let him not look for good whose works are ill. If you're doing bad deeds, don't try to look and see, well, where's the goodness in this? And now may God, throned high in majesty, bring us, both great and small, into his glory. Thus I have paid the miller with my story. That's the ending when the Reeve says, aha, I paid him back. I got my revenge. You see? I don't know if you're a Charlie Chan movie fan, but you should actually widen your horizons and look at some old Charlie Chan films. The detective would often quote Confucius or pseudo-Confucian sayings in a way that sounds ancient and authoritative. But the audience usually understood that these lines are, what, not really Confucius? Not really Confucius. The audience theoretically understood that they were invented around, stylized, and they were used to create a tone with a gentle irony or humor. Some people did, I can tell you that, and some people didn't. Some people to this day think that when they watch a Charlie Chan movie and they hear him say, Confucius say, and then they listen to what he said, they really believe Confucius wrote that. Have you read Confucius? Jimmy's thinking about reading it on this website. He's certainly going to read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, if he hasn't already. But here are some of the things from the Charlie Chan movie to give you a taste of his wisdom. Alibi have habit of disappearing like hole in water. Always harder to keep murder secret than an egg to bounce on sidewalk. Of course, this was clipped English language to mimic unfortunately, what someone from China may be talking in those days. And if you listen to people from other countries, they certainly have accents. I have a Chicago accent because I grew up in Chicago. Ancient ancestors once say words cannot cook rice. There's 632 of these things. Someone actually took the time to count them. I didn't. But you can find them here on this website if you'd like to go there and look. This is nearly identical to the Reeve's pieces of wisdom when he said the greatest scholar is not the wisest man. There's no such thing, but the writer, Chaucer, which we don't like to talk about, but the narrator, in this case the Reeve, was being narrated by the anonymous narrator to us. Remember, it's complicated narration. He puts these in there and he sprinkles them throughout the tale. And it sounds like a nugget of ancient animal fable wisdom, but it's not. You can try to look it up. It doesn't exist. The writer makes these things up. Which begs the question, maybe you should be making some things up too, huh? I don't know. There's enough things made up. Next, I want to talk about the mistaken identity motif. Another thing going on in the Reeve's tale is a technique that became popular in classic literature and the movies called mistaken identity. This type of comedy is broadly used when you're talking about a comedy where a character is misidentified, whether through disguise, misunderstanding, deception. In any case, because it's dark in the house of this tale, there's a series of mistaken identities. You know that if you read it with me, right? They mix up the beds. Same thing happened in the Miller's tale when it was dark, didn't it? So darkness in those days, no cell phones, no really good street lights. You don't need that in any way to have a mistaken identity motif. One of the guys who invented this was Aristophanes, which we read on Jimmy's website, Lysistrata. Shakespeare uses mistaken identity a lot. Much Ado About Nothing is one of the plays he wrote. And Moliere and Oscar Wilde use it, a couple of the famous writers. Moliere is a French, Oscar Wilde, British. In the movie North by Northwest, which is famous Alfred Hitchcock, Cary Grant is part of this. This technique was used by Hitchcock. Cary Grant is mistaken for someone else. And one of my personal favorites is Being There. You've never seen that movie? Watch it. Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers is a servant in a house. His boss dies, and he actually leaves, and he ends up being an advisor to the President of the United States. His name in here, I think Patty Chayefsky wrote the screenplay for this. I'd have to double check that. But in any case, Peter Sellers' role, he plays, his name is Chance. His real name is Chance, but he becomes known as Chauncey Gardner because he's actually a gardener for his boss. He does the garden. It's a great movie of mistaken identity. Layers. This revenge theme in the Reeve's tale plays out against a backdrop of many, many different layers, one of them being pride and social climbing. Simpkin's not just a thief, he's a man who likes his status. Remember, he was born to a working class, but he elevated himself by marrying into clerical respectability. Remember, he married his wife who was in a convent, and then boasting of his wife's noble lineage. He's a jealous guy, too, and he's a bully. He's all of those things. Jealous, he's a bully, he beats people up. And he's got a lot of pride, which makes him blind in many cases. His pretensions make him laughable, and his desire for control turns out to be his downfall. Desire for control is often what leads to the downfall of many people. Control, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is an illusion. Jimmy at email.jimmy.com if you want to know why I believe it. So the Miller in the Reeve's tale is a man who tries hard to be what he is not. Right? Would you agree with that? At the heart of this tale is also class conflict, but not the kind that has clear winners and losers. There's class conflict. The Cambridge students represent intellectual authority, right? They're smart people. But they're hardly moral examples. I mean, right? They bed the women. Their vengeance is cunning, cruel, and it's disturbing once you stop laughing. isn't it? Think about what they did. And keep remembering why we read these classics, like I said, to learn how others lead their life or how not to lead our lives. I don't know anyone in this story that I would want to emulate, do you? But I certainly learned a lot by watching the behavior of these people. If the miller is brutish, the scholars, you could say, are manipulative, aren't they? They manipulate. Perhaps the message is that class doesn't mean that you have virtue. Johnny Bear, which is on this website, and I read it with you, by John Steinbeck, explores this idea of virtue and being good and moral, right? You should read that story with me. Behavior through actions is the tell. Let me highlight that. Behavior through actions is the tell. Behavior, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out, is always the tell. The miller uses his muscle to enforce what he does. He steals things, right? And the students use their wit, but in both cases, their actions are revealing to us. They're schmucks. Would you agree with that? I think the most troubling layer is sex being used as power and punishment. Sex, right? Who would have thought that in medieval literature, sex is talked about like it is, right? This body, including the Miller's Tale before this, right? The sexual acts that drives the revenge are not romantic in any way, shape. There's no love in here like the Knight's Tale, is there? Now, if you read the Knight's Tale with me, you probably remember it, right? There was idealistic love. In fact, Emily, the woman that both of those knights loved, didn't know it until the end of the story. She didn't really realize it, and even then, she didn't want to be loved. She wanted to be chased. So women are treated as almost objects in these stories, aren't they? Until we get to some of the others, which we'll read. So the sexual acts that drive these revenge, they're not romantic. They're simply actions carried out with motives other than love. Which brings in perhaps the most powerful layer. Why do people do what they do? Can I highlight that? Why do people do what they do? Why do you do what you do? What's your motivation? What is the motivation of people's actions? You see people acting out all the time, right? You go to a play, you watch people act out, right? They tell you not to take, there's no recordings allowed, and yet you see people taking out their recorders and recording what's being played by the orchestra. That's, that's right. It's behavior. It's a tell. Behavior is always a tell. Always. Which includes non-behavior. So what's the motivation of these people? I took down a few recent headlines for this why discussion. Why do you do what you do? But I'm sure, regardless of when you're reading this with me, I'm sure you can find your own based on whenever you're reading with me. Here's a few that I picked up today in order for this analysis. Lawmakers suspended after arrest in connection with investigation into sex offenses. County reaches $4 billion agreement to settle sexual abuse claims at a juvenile facility. A rapper is hit with a new sex trafficking charge a month before his trial. A comedian is charged with rape and sexual assault. The number of lawsuits alleging abuse at child treatment centers reaches 150. These are just random headlines that I picked up today from the news. Look at all this sex in here. Take any of these headlines and start asking yourself, what the hell's the motivation behind the action? Why would a lawmaker, right? A lawmaker, he's in Congress, or he's a lawmaker, whatever. Wherever this headline came from, I'm not going to tell you which country. It's not America, right? Why would he do that? Why would he use sex? Why would he violate his post? What's the motivation behind doing it? Was he in love? Did he fall in love? Most of the time we can't tell because people don't have glass heads, right? Most of the time we can't tell what people are really thinking. So while you're innocent until proven guilty, right? You are innocent. What motivates someone to do these things? If you are a lawmaker, why would you commit sexual offenses, whatever that means? And if you ran a juvenile facility, why would you allow sexual abuse? Why would you do that? And if you're well, because I can, Jimmy. Well, there you go. If you were a rapper, sex trafficking, so on, really? The Reeve's Tale is over 600 years old. 600 years ago, this tale was written. And still today, maybe we got headlines like, Miller accused of stealing from university. Students charged with sex offenses. You can take any of these tales and write yourself a nice headline, couldn't you? And it seems very current. So not much changes, does it? But in classical literature, we get to examine closely and carefully motivations which give us clues into our own behavior and the behavior of others. The actions of the students, ladies and gentlemen, is actually almost frighteningly casual and feelingless. Isn't it? When we read that story together, it was almost like, okay, I'll just sex. I'll take the daughter. You take the wife. Really? The Miller was a bully, isn't he? Women are just things to be used in this tale. What has changed? What has changed in our own world? There's no thieving going on, right? There's no stealing going on, right? This tale confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Sex is used often for control. Read with me Aristophanes. I mentioned Aristophanes earlier as one of the culprits who invented mistaken identity. Well, this play that's on this website right now, Lysistrata, is not about mistaken identity. It's about sex being used for control. The women of Greece go on strike until the men stop fighting war, and they go on strike by not having sex. Isn't that an interesting concept? So while the Reeve hides this most disturbing aspects in a farce, I mean, this is pretty funny stuff when you're reading it. The implications of this funny stuff are very, very serious. Lust, pride, power, almost get entangled, and no one emerges from this night unscathed. And finally, the Reeve's Tale explores the breakdown of order. It begins with stolen grain, ends up with mistaken identities, broken teeth, in a household in disarray. Authority is mocked, morality is suspended, the physical space, the bedroom, is the threshold between order and intimacy, is turned into a site of confusion, right? You think you're safe, right? No, I don't think so. By dawn, the chaos has run its course. The students ride off victorious, or are they victorious? Shame on them. But the laughter that follows feels uneasy, doesn't it? So in the end, the Reeve's Tale holds a mirror to medieval society. Don't forget, the pilgrims come from all walks of life. You read that in the prologue with me, the different people that are on this journey. So it reflects hierarchies, hypocrisies, appetites, good, bad, loyalty. This is revenge, but it's also a reminder that laughter can expose and hide the deeper consequences of human behavior. Why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? Do you ever think about that? Sigmund Freud, one of my favorites. He's out of favor now, but Sigmund Freud, a great psychologist, I believe, Freud stated that the unconscious in the development of jokes is almost identical to dreaming. And he wrote a great book, The Interpretation of Dreams. When you dream, I had a dream that my brother-in-law asked me for financial advice, except my brother-in-law is dead. So when I asked, because I can't I don't know anything about financial advice. I mean, it doesn't mean I don't invest, but he's dead. Why would he need financial advice from me? In dreaming, Preconsciousness, the day's residue goes into you when you dream and you sort it all out. And you should keep a journal of your dreams. You'd be surprised what you learn when you write down what you dream. There's recurring things, recurring patterns. And it's the same thing with jokes. In jokes, the truth is there behind the joke. You know this. I'm just joking. When you say that, you're not just joking. Think about it. You're full of doo-doo. No, you're not. I'm just joking. See? You don't have to agree with Freud, but there's a certain truth to jokes when you joke around. Those are the layers I'm talking about. Plot. Let's go back now, and we're going to finish this off. Plot and Aristotle, my favorite buddy, right? 6 main elements: plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song. Plot and character are the most important. You should realize by now that tragedy means the story, whether it's a play, a short story, a novel. According to Aristotle, comedy is an imitation of inferior people, not the upper class, right? But that doesn't say the characters in comedies are inferior in any way. The knights are not inferior, right? They were not inferior. They were knights. The miller's not inferior. He's just a crook, right? He's a thief, which makes him inferior, in my opinion. So comedy is a play that depicts some sort of laughable error. A disgrace in turn elicits emotion, like embarrassment or delight. You got to be uncomfortable when they're talking about what's going on in that bedroom. If not, email me, Jimmy@Jimmy.com. Comic characters are not evil necessarily. They're just ridiculous and laughable. Do you think they're evil? Email me, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. The resale is more comedy than tragedy. So the plot is a representation of human action. If you read the plot, everything is logical, right? The miller is a thief. He steals from the university. The students want to go not to get revenge, but to have a joke, a jaunt, right? That's a J-A-U-N-T. Look it up. They go there. The miller, lets the horse go. They spend the whole day chasing the horse down that they came with. And he says, why don't you stay the night? So he himself causes his own problem. Right? They drink, and he falls asleep, and the rest is history. So Aristotle, this is a complex plot. That's the human action. This is a complex plot. It's a change of fortune. The miller, who's been living high on the hog by stealing, right, and living for, at least 20 years, because his daughter's 20 years old. But now there's intricate twists. He steals unabated from the university, despite the provost complaining. Doesn't matter. He steals, that you can't do nothing to me. I'm a bully. I got my sword, right? So I think why you can see this is a complex plot. So it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We've talked a lot about thought themes before on this website, but as a reminder, one of the most famous stories of revenge, this is a revenge plot, is Hamlet, which is also on this website. Another one is The Count of Monte Cristo, which is or will be by Alexander Dumas. And in movies, John Wick and Gladiator are just two of the many, many revenge motif movies. So revenge is a great catalyst for movies, right? And for story. And it stems from, why revenge? Well, emotional release, perception of moral, you're avenging me. Anger, sense of justice. In John Wick, they kill his dog, right? You remember. Anger, frustration are powerful emotions that can trigger a desire for revenge, especially when you feel wrong or humiliated. I'm not going to take that. But the trigger for anger or frustration is often in the eye of the beholder. What offends you may not offend me. Sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but names will never hurt. Do you remember that verse when you were a kid? I do. Marcus Aurelius, who's on this website, in Meditation number 5, number 28. Read this with me. Art thou angry with him whose armpits stink? I, We had a couple over for dinner when I was reading Marcus Aurelius, and I printed this out, and I said, I want to share with you one of the most famous things that I read from Marcus. And I started reading this and laughing because have you ever smelled somebody with body odor? Have you? Do you have body odor? Are you angry with him whose mouth smells smell? Do you ever smell somebody with bad breath? Like close talkers? So you get, oh God, you get ticked off. Not that you should revenge yourself by eating garlic. What good will this anger do thee, says Marcus Aurelius. He has such a mouth. He has such armpits. Maybe he can't do nothing about it. It's necessary that such an emulation must come from such things. But the man has reason, it will be said, and he is able, if he takes pains, to discover wherein he offends, and I wish thee well of thy discovery. Well then, and thou hast reason, by thy rational faculty, by thy rational faculty. Stir up his rational faculty. Talk to him like a reasonable person and show him his error and admonish him. And if he listens, you're going to cure him, and there will be no need of anger. Think about that. Think about what makes you angry and how to diffuse the anger. Marcus Aurelius says you should reason with people. Well, you can reason with a lot of people, but there's certain people you can't reason with. Would you agree with that? And then what? Well, Marcus seems to think that emotions are what causes violence to your soul. Anger, hurting others, pleasure, pain, lies in being rudderless when you have no purpose. And I encourage you to read those meditations on this website because they're very, very profound. They contain a lot of wisdom about controlling your emotions, which, if you can't control, often lead to a road going nowhere. And I can tell you that Jimmy has experience with that, with emotions, emotional outbursts. I don't know if I want to share any personal outbursts with you, but anger, I've been less angry as I grow older, although I still get angry. My wife says she could see it in my eyes. Of course, I never look at myself when I'm angry, but I guess people do when they know you're angry. They know when you mean business. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy's analysis of the Reeve's Tale from Chaucer. Thanks for being here. Be sure to read more Canterbury tales on my website. You can go to YouTube and scan that QR code, take you right there. There's a lot going on my website. Got a lot of hours on this. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com is my email. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com is my email. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. And again, I want to hear from you. If you've got a different idea about what you just read with me on the Reeve's Tale, send it on over. Send it on over. And remember, if you do seek revenge, make sure you do what Confucius say and dig those two graves. It's not a good thing, revenge. It's not.